that. Excited about it. Now let's get to the topic at hand. The 2020 pay scale for women in ministry. This pay scale was supposed to be presented several months ago, but there was a problem with the data, and I would not present bad data. So we kept working on it and working with the consultant who was pulling together the data for us, and finally the data that we have today, we're glad to say is it's ready. Okay. Unfortunately, and I'm going to say this in advance, little has changed for women in terms of when we did the first pay scale report, which was in 2015. The amounts have not changed much. But I'm doing this pay scale so that women know, number one, what you should be paid, and men know what they should be paying, and women know what they should be paying. Okay? It's 2020 in just a few days. Okay? 684 senior pastors responded for this survey. 583 of them were African American, 82 were Latina or Latino, and 19 were Asian American. Okay? 69 of the respondents were female, the rest were male. Okay? Also, in this particular set of data, we did some work on the sizes of the congregations that we reached out to, because we've learned over the last 5 years the congregation sizes that most matter. Okay? And so let's get right to the report, which of course we're going to also put online in the next 2 weeks on the Women of Color in Ministry website. We're going to put it online. So let's get started. Okay, we're going to start with the largest churches and then go down. Okay, so the first data concerns churches that are 1,000 to 2,000 members in size. And the reason we have such a wide range, as you all know, people don't always tell you the exact number of congregants that they have. We fudge numbers. Some of us don't even keep good numbers. So we asked how many in your seats, not on roll, but in your seats. And we still got interesting kinds of answers. But anyway, that's the first group. That's the first group, 1,000 to 2,000. And the average age of these churches was 56 years old. Yes, there were some that were as old as 120, but the average was 56, okay? 64% of those answering in this age group had an MDiv or more in terms of education. Now let's get to the numbers. If you are a woman in ministry in 2020, basically, with 5 years or less experience, 5 years or less in ministry, okay, here is what you will get paid. You are in a church that's 1,000 to 2,000 members, okay, you are likely to get it for one sermon, if the church has 1,000 to 2,000 members in the seats, you are likely to get $500 for one sermon. And if you do 2 sermons for 5 years or less of experience in ministry, you're likely to get $700. If you go to a church and you preach, but you also did, let's say, a 2-hour workshop, and we see this often with women's weekends. you did a 2-hour workshop of some kind, okay? You're likely to get for the whole weekend the sermon and the 2-hour workshops from a church that pays 1,000, that has 1,000 to 2,000 members. You're likely to get $1,000 for the whole weekend, okay? That's what the pastors told us, and then we cross-checked that with about 320 women, and they told us that those numbers were in fact true. Those numbers were in fact true. So if you're off, then you know what you're looking at. Now let's look at sisters who've been in ministry at least 6 years up to 12 to 15. Let's say we did it up to 12, but at least 6 to 12 years in ministry. For one sermon at a church that has 1,000 to 2,000 members, you're likely to get a check for $700. $700, okay? If you preach two sermons at a church of that size, you're likely to get a check of $1,000. Excuse me, I'm sorry, $800. You're likely to get a check of $800 for two sermons. Now, I know that sounds strange for you to get $700 for one and $800 for two, but that is actually what's happening. That's actually what's happening. If you preach a sermon and then you do a 2-hour workshop and you have 6 to 12 years of experience in ministry, you might get at least 71% of the pastors said that they would pay $1,200. $1,200. Okay? So, just giving you the figures. Now, if you go to a church and you are a female pastor, the church has 1,000 to 2,000 members for one sermon, and this is what all of the pastors said to us, and by all, I mean something like 92% said this. In these churches of this size, they pay the female pastors $1,000. $1,000 per sermon. If you preach twice at the same church, two sermons, you're usually going to get $1,200. Now, don't ask me to explain the reasoning. I'm just giving you the numbers. And then if you do a workshop that's a couple of hours long and one sermon, you're likely to get $1,200 as well. You're likely to get $1,200. Now, let's say that you are a woman of a national reputation, and we know who these women are. You know, it's the Vashti McKenzie's, it's the Emily Towns, it's Renita Weems, it's Cynthia Hale. You know the names, okay? You know the names. For one sermon in 2020, those women are receiving $1,200 to $1,500. Or $1,200 and up. Let's put it like that. For one sermon, $1,200. If the church has 1,000 to 2,000 members, it's $1,200 and up, right? If you are a woman of national stature and you do 2 sermons at a church same day, you are likely to get a check for $1,500 and up. $1,500 and up. The largest amount we were told was $2,000, but that figure was only given to us by 3% of the clergy. Okay, 3%. And then if you go to preach and you also do a workshop and you are a woman of national renown, you can expect to again get $1,500 and up. $1,500 and up for a workshop and one sermon. Okay, so that's the first set of numbers. Let's go to set 2. Set 2 is for churches that are 500 to 700 members in size. And again, we did the numbers this way because so many people do not give us accurate numbers. They don't keep up with the numbers. So we asked churches that were 5 to 700 members in size. Most of the churches that we, 62% of the churches that we spoke to in this area said they had at least 650 members. Okay, at least 650 members. The average age of the churches in this group was 63 years, and 72% of the pastors had an MDiv or more. An MDiv or more. Okay. If you go to preach to a workshop at these particular churches, here are the numbers. If you walk in and you have 5 years or less experience, believe me, the pastors say, they'll tell you, I pay everybody the same thing. They don't. They don't. If you walk in the door, 5 to 700 members, and you have 5 years or less preaching and ministry experience, they're going to pay $350 to $400, and unfortunately that figure was the same in 2015. It was the same, okay? If you are going in and you preaching twice at a church, 5 years or less experience, you can expect a check of $500. Some cases $600, but they only 22% said up to $600. So the number is $500 for the majority. And then if you go and you do one sermon and a 2-hour workshop, you have 5 years or less experience, you are probably going to get, again, $600. $600 to $700. $600 to $700 was the range. For those women who have 6 or 12 years of experience, and they go to churches that have 5 to 700 members, for one sermon, you can expect to get $500. $500. Okay, that's what the majority said. If you do 2, you can expect to get $700 to $800. If you do 2, if you have 6, 12, or more years experience. Okay? If you go to a church with 5 to 700 members and you do one sermon and a weekend workshop, 2 hours, 3 hours, you can expect to get a total of $800 for the whole weekend. Okay? You can expect to get $800. Now, as with any data, of course, the numbers will vary and they won't always be exactly these numbers, but we're giving you the likely numbers that are the numbers that are being paid, and we're also trying to help you to get a range for those sisters who they have no idea and they say, I want to put together a contract, I'm afraid and I don't know the numbers. We're giving you the numbers. We're giving you the numbers, okay? Also, especially for those workshops, you really need to know the numbers for those workshops, okay? If you're a female pastor, 5 to 700 member church, and you go to preach, they're going to pay you $700 to $800 for one sermon, and that number has not changed since 2015. It hasn't changed. If you go and you do 2 sermons, female pastors, you do 2 sermons at a church that has 5 to 700 members, they're going to give you $800 to $1,000. They're going to give you $800 to $1,000. If you do one sermon and you spent a weekend doing a workshop, especially if you spent time out of your pulpit, you're going to likely get, again, $800 to $1,000 for that as well. These are the numbers. For women with national reputations at these churches, you're going to get for one sermon, you're going to get $800 to $1,000. $800 to $1,000, and that's actually lower, okay, than what it was in 2017 when we ran some numbers. For 2 sermons, Women of National Note, church has 500 to 700 members, you're going to get 800 to 1,000. Okay? Women of National Note, if you go and you do 1 sermon, but you also did a weekend workshop for a couple of hours and sat around with the women maybe even 3 hours, you're going to get 1,000 and up, but it starts at 1,000. It starts at 1,000. Okay? That's what the majority of the churches are paying. Now, and again, we get back to whether or not you have contracts and you require certain amounts. That certainly is different. That can change things. For churches that have 300 to 400 members, the average age of these churches was 64. 54% of the preachers had an MDiv or better. Your woman with 5 years of experience, 5 years or less of experience, and you go to preach at a church that has 300 or 400 people in the seats, they're going to pay you $200 to $250 for one sermon. $200 to $250 for one sermon. If you preach twice at a church on the same day, they're going to pay you $400 to $500. $400 to $500. If you preach and you do a workshop, they are going to pay you $500. $500. 5 years or less experience. Now, let's look at the women who are been in ministry at least 6 years, 6 to 12 years or more. If you go to a church and the church has 300 to 400 members, we're on 300 to 400, that's the size, okay? And for one sermon, the church is going to give you $300. One sermon, $300. If you go to that church and you do 2 sermons, 2 services, they're going to pay you $500. Don't ask me why it's not 6. I'm just giving you the numbers. You do 2, they're going to give you $500. You do 1 sermon and a workshop, they're going to give you $500 again. They're going to give you $500. If you are a female pastor and you go to a church of this size for 1 sermon, because you're a pastor, they're going to pay you $500. Okay? If you are a woman pastor and you do 2 sermons for a 300 to 400 member church, they're going to pay you about $700. 69% of those responding said they paid $700. That's actually down since 2017. Then if you go and you do 1 sermon and you do a workshop as well, they're going to pay you $800. They're going to pay you, $700 to $800. 7 to 8. Women with national reputations at these churches, 1 sermon, you're going to get $800. 2 sermons, you're going to get $1,000 to $1,200. A sermon, 1 sermon, and a workshop, you're going to get $1,000 to $1,200. Okay? Now let's go to the churches that have 200 to 300 members in the seats. They have more than that on roll, but we're talking about in the seats. The average age of these churches was 69, and again, we had some young, some very young churches. churches that were 25 years old, some that were 125. But the average age of these churches was 69. 58% of the pastors had an MDiv or more. Here are the numbers. Here are the numbers. 200 to 300 members. And this is where so many women are preaching. They're either preaching at the churches that have 150 or at this level. So these numbers are critically important for women to know. 5 years or less experience, if you preach at a church with 200 to 300 members, they're likely going to give you a check for $150 for one sermon. $150, okay? If you go to a church, 200 to 300 members, and you did 2 services, they're going to pay you $300. You have 5 years or less experience, and unfortunately that number is the same as it was in 2015. If you do a sermon and a workshop, they're going more likely, this is what the numbers told us, they're going to pay you $400. And it's typically because it was across 2 days. That's what people kept telling the person who was collecting the data. 6 to 12 years of experience, church 200 to 300 members, one sermon, they're going to give you a check for $200. $200, okay? If you go and you do 2 sermons, in this case, it is double. You're going to get $400. If you do 1 sermon and a workshop, you're going to get a check for $500, and we were consistently told that most often this is tied to women's events. Okay? So 300 members, 1 sermon and the workshop, $500 for the entire week. If you are a female pastor and you go to this church for 1 sermon, you are going to get a check for $400, and that's actually down from the 2017 totals. If you go to this church and you do 2 sermons, the amount you're going to get is $500 for 2 sermons, 200 to 300 members. 2 sermons. If you go and you are a woman pastor and you did a sermon and you did a workshop, you're going to get $600. $600. Women with national reputations, if you go to a church this size, they start with 1 sermon for $500, 2 sermons, 79% said that they paid $800 to $1,000. Women of national note, $800 to $1,000. And then if you did 1 sermon and a weekend workshop, it was the same thing, $800 to $1,000. $800 to $1,000 for women of national note. Okay. Let's get to the churches that are 100 to 150 members in size. And these were the majority in the survey, actually. They were the majority at 31%. The majority of the churches were 100 to 150 members in size. The average age of these churches was 57, and 41% of the pastors had MDivs. 41% had MDivs, okay, or more. Women with 5 years or less preaching experience in ministry. If you go to a church with 100 to 150 members, they are going to give you a check for $125. $125, okay? If you go and you do 2 sermons, they're going to give you a check for $200. $200. $200. And it was really interesting as the data was being collected, because to get at the right answers, you couldn't always ask people go down the list in one day. That's what took so long to pull all of this together. So $200, 100 to 150 members. If you're a woman, 5 years or less experience in preaching or in ministry, and you did one sermon plus you did a workshop, they're going to give you $200. $200 to $225. $200 to $225. Women with 6 years or more experience in ministry for one sermon, 6 to 12 years in ministry for one sermon. The church has 100 to 150 people. They're going to pay you for one sermon $200. $200, that hasn't changed since 2015. It hasn't changed. For 2 sermons, same day, same church, they're going to give you $400. $400, and that is up. That is up. They're going to give you $400. For if you go and you did one sermon as well as a weekend workshop, they're again going to pay you $400. $400, and again, so many of the respondents said these were attached to women's weekends. They were attached to women's weekends, okay? If you're a female pastor for one sermon at a church this size, they're going to give you $300. They're going to give you $300. For 2 sermons, they're going to give you $400 to $500, okay? And then if you go and you're a pastor, you did one sermon plus a weekend, they're going to give you $500, and that number is up. That number is up. Since 2017, that number is up. Women with national reputations for churches that have 100 to 150 members for one sermon, they begin with $500. For 2 sermons, they are paid $700. For a sermon and a weekend workshop, they are paid $600 to $800. $600 to $800. Okay? Now let's get to that group where so many women are these days. And these are the churches with 50 to 100 members. 50 to 100 members. The average age of the churches that we surveyed was 51 years. We had some that were old as 140 years. And 38% of these clergy had an MDiv. This was the lowest number for clergy with an MDiv. If you had 5 years or less of preaching experience and you went to preach for a church with 50 to 100 members, they're going to give you $100. They're going to give you $100. As I said, many would like to have us believe that they pay everybody the same thing, male, female, regardless of age. It's not true, okay? If you go in and you do 2 sermons at a church of this size, and it's usually, again, it's tied to women's events, they're going to give you $200. $200 for 50 to 100 members. They're going to give you $200. If you do one sermon and a workshop, usually a 2-hour workshop, usually they're going to also give you $200 if they have 50 to 100 members, okay? Women with 6 to 12 years or more experience in ministry. If you go to a church that has 50 to 100 members For one sermon, they're going to give you $200 to $250. $200 to $250. For two sermons, they're going to pay you $400. $400. If you do one sermon and you did a workshop, they're usually going to pay you $400 as well. They're going to pay you $400. If you're a female pastor and you went to a church that has 50 to 100 members, they're going to start you out for one sermon with $300. For two sermons, they're going to pay you $400 to $500. If you do one sermon and you did a workshop, they're also going to pay you $500. And this was clearly tied to women being pastors. You know how we do that return thing, and you want to be paid the same thing? That's what that's about. Women of national reputations who go to small churches, for one sermon, they have 50 to 100 members. They're going to start you out with $400. They're going to pay you $400. If you do two sermons, they're going to pay you $600. If you do a weekend workshop plus one sermon, they're going to pay you $600 to $800. And as I said earlier, many women just have set fees. And so if you have a set fee and a church agrees to pay it, then your numbers will look different. Now, let me say a word about those who say, I don't want to charge a church. I don't want to charge a church. If you did the time in study and preparation, you deserve to be paid. If you don't want to charge a church, that is your business. No one's going to make you charge a church. No one's going to say anything bad about you. If you say, I don't want to charge a church, I'll take whatever they give me. Sisters, let me assure you, I've been in ministry a long time. If that's what you do, you will get less. You will get less. Often you will get fake gifts. We know about the fake pearls. And then they'll throw some flowers in, and along with that, it'll be a $50 check when you should have gotten $200 or $300. So, but that's up to you. Some women are scared. They say, if I charge, then they won't let me preach. And I already don't get very many opportunities. If you are at that point, then you make that decision accordingly. But I can tell you from experience, and from the experience of all of the sisters out there who are in my age group, it was when we got enough courage to say, this is what I'm charging, that we got what we deserved, or close to it, And if you are doing workshops, you've got to ask for a certain amount, or you will get cheated every time. Every time. You will get cheated every time. So, if you have difficulty doing it, you can put together a brief. It could be a contract is, thank you for agreeing to pay for my flight and my hotel room and meals, and for providing me an honorarium of A, for preaching, and B, for a workshop. Looking forward to seeing you soon. And you send that a couple of weeks before the event. That's a contract. Most pastors already know. They already know what they should be paying. But if they can get away with paying less, they'll do it. They'll do it. They do it to young male preachers. They do it to young male preachers as well. So if they can get away with it, they will definitely. Sorry about that. The one time that you don't turn off your phone, that's when your phone rings. Sorry about that. But as I said, preachers know. They know what should be paid, and they will get away with paying less if they can. And in those instances when women's organizations are deciding what you should be paid, if the pastor doesn't set the amount, unfortunately, the women pay less because they often don't have anything to determine when those figures change. They don't know when the figures change. So if they've been paying their speakers $300 for the last 10 years, nobody said to them, "Here's the new numbers." So if the pastors don't pick the numbers, they definitely will be lower. So I'm just encouraging sisters to consider simply doing a brief note and saying, and to brothers, I want to say, you have heard these numbers. Make sure you are at least doing these numbers or better. These numbers or better. We've got to do better in compensating women clergy. We've just got to do better. There's no reason that these numbers are still where they are. And of course, in the data, on several occasions, on purpose, we asked people what had they paid their revivalist. And they gave us those numbers. And of course, 90% of the time, the revivalists were men. And for those sermons, and the numbers were totally different. Their Men's Day numbers, totally different. Totally different, okay? We've got to do better. But women, we will do better if we start to stand up for ourselves. I can speak up for you. Other women out there are speaking up for you. But you also have to learn to speak up for yourself. It's okay if someone says, okay, you can't come to preach. Okay? You will live through that. You will live. We've all had churches, when we started to speak up for ourselves, we had churches to say, okay, or if someone offers, if they'll send me something and say, Dr. Simmons, we'd like to have you come and do XYZ, and this is what we're paying for the honorarium. If I know what they should be paying me, I'll say thank you. Perhaps we can work together in the future, not at this time. And then if the pastor calls me, I don't have any problem saying, my honorarium is higher than that. We can work something out. We do. Or I simply say, hopefully we can work together in the future. That's the way I do it for workshops, for lectures. And let me also throw this in too, because sisters need to know this, especially those in the academy. Women are really poorly paid when they go to speak at seminaries. When they go to do these lectures at seminaries, they are poorly paid, really poorly paid compared to men. And of course, sisters, you all know, if you think black churches pay poorly, many white churches pay even less. Unless, as I said, you put your honorarium out there. But if you're going to churches, and I gave you the numbers, and they are Presbyterian, United Methodist, UCC, Disciples of Christ, etc., and they are white, you're going to get paid even less. Across the board, from 1,000 down to 100 members, you're going to get paid less if you don't say something. All right? I hope this has been helpful. I really hope that this has been helpful to you as you go into 2020. My prayer for you is that you will do your best to be your best in ministry, that you will step into with courage all that God has called you to do, whether you are in any area of ministry, whether you're a senior pastor, whether you're a youth minister, or minister of music, that you will step in and do what you're supposed to do briefly. Do it greatly. Today's video won't be up as long as I usually keep them up for 10 days. This one won't be up as long because we're going to move the numbers to the Women of Color in Ministry page, okay? We're going to move it to the Women of Color in Ministry page. And last but not least, I want to tell you one more time, please remember the TOPS program, okay? This is the ordination program for sisters. If you are out there, I don't care where you are in the country, and you have a Master's of Divinity from an earned seminary, an accredited seminary. You have an earned Master's of Divinity from an accredited seminary, and you all know the list, the Association of Theological Schools list, but you've had trouble. You waited 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 15 years. You can't get ordained. We want to hear from you. We want to hear from you. We can't help you if we don't hear from you. If you know women who are in this position, let them know. Send us an email to the Women of Color in Ministry project at gmail.com. Excuse me, Women of Color in Ministry at gmail.com, not project. Women of Color in Ministry at gmail.com. We're going to keep putting up the information about this. You're going to see it throughout 2020, and then we'll let you know what we're trying to do in November 2020. But I'm excited about this project. I think it's going to be major. This is a justice issue. This is not just about the money. The money matters, but this is about justice. And I aim, along with some denominational leaders, pastors, endorsers, I aim to help so many women get free. And I want to shout out American Baptist Seminary of the West and Union Theological Seminary. They are the other partners in the Women of Color in Ministry project. I want to shout them out. That's it. I hope that you are going to have a great 2020. God bless. Thank you for joining me all year long. Happy New Year in advance.